I don't want to feed an extra mouth, my son Darren said, sliding the folder across the polished dining room table. I looked down. It was a job application for a janitor. It's at my company, he continued, unable to meet my eyes. So, you can, contribute. I smiled a slow, tired smile, and I told him I'd take it. What my son didn't know is that I own the building he works in, I own the company he works for, and the CEO he idolizes. Well, he calls me sir. My name is Lionel Fairwood. I'm 71 years old, and I am a black man who has come to understand that sometimes the only way to show your children what money is truly worth is to make them believe you have none. It all began last Sunday at the dinner table, the one I paid for. I was sitting in my son Darren's home, a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial, out in the suburbs that he was convinced he was carrying a mortgage on. He wasn't. I held it through a trust, though he and his wife Lacey had no reason to know that. The air inside that house always carried a particular weight, a thickness I recognized immediately. I knew that smell well. It was the scent of people stretching themselves thin, spending just past the edge of what they actually had. Welcome to Honor Revenge Stories, where real pain leads to real reckoning. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found your way. Go ahead and tap that subscribe button so the next story comes right to you. Before we get into today's tale, I'd love to know, when you sit down with a story like this, what are you hoping to walk away with? Drop it in the comments. Now, a quick note, some details in this story have been shaped for the purposes of telling it well. Any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. Lacey, my daughter-in-law, was sighing loudly as she scrolled through her phone, her thumb hammering at the screen in irritation. "It's just impossible, Darren," she said, her voice sharp. "This new country club membership fee went up again, and our trip to Vail. I mean, how are we supposed to manage?" Darren, my 40-year-old son, the boy I had raised to be strong, just dragged a nervous hand through his hair. "I know, honey. I'll look at the quarterly bonuses. Maybe I can move some things around." I just sipped my water and said nothing. I'd already seen the brand new 85-inch television on their wall, the designer handbag sitting on the entryway floor that had cost more than my first car. I knew my son's salary as a vice president at Vidian Dynamics. It was substantial, but not substantial enough for any of this. I had been retired for a year now, or at least that was the story I gave Darren. I had stepped back from active management of my portfolio to enjoy the quiet life my wife Rosalind and I had always mapped out together. But Rosalind had been gone for 5 years now, and the quiet was just quiet. Darren cleared his throat. He looked at Lacey, then at me. It was a practice look, a poorly rehearsed performance. "Dad," he started, his voice strained. "We need to talk about your situation." "My situation?" I raised an eyebrow. "I live in the same small paid-off house in the old neighborhood. I drive a 15-year-old truck. My needs are simple." "Your retirement?" he clarified. "Now that you're not working, things are tighter for everyone." Lacey jumped in, resting her hand on his. "What Darren is trying to say, Lionel, is that we love having you over for dinner. We really do. But, well, we just can't afford to support you anymore. It's not fair to our family. Support me." Those words landed like a physical blow. I, Lionel Fairwood, who had paid for Darren's Ivy League MBA. I, who had anonymously funded the scholarship that secured him his first internship. I, who had been quietly covering the property taxes on this very house for the past 3 years, because my son kept letting them slip. I hadn't taken a single dollar from him in his entire 40 years of life. I hadn't asked for a thing. I cooked my own meals. I settled my own bills. This Sunday dinner was the only thing I ever accepted from him, and even then I usually brought the groceries. I was so stunned I couldn't find words. I just looked at him. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the boy I'd held close when Rosalind passed. He finally met my eyes, and his were cold. "Look, Dad, I'm a vice president now. I have an image to maintain. I have my own family. I don't want to feed an extra mouth." There it was, the truth raw and ugly. An extra mouth. After 45 years of fatherhood, that was what I had been reduced to. In that silence, as those words hung in the air of that overpriced, sterile dining room, I thought of Rosalind. We had built our company, GC Holdings, from a single investment made out of our garage. We'd worked 18-hour days. We made billions, and we'd made a pact. We would live simply. We would raise Darren to be humble, to be hardworking, to never become the kind of spoiled, arrogant child of wealth we saw all around us. I studied Darren's face, the weakness in his chin, the entitlement behind his eyes. Rosalind, my love, I thought, we failed. Our humility didn't teach him to be grateful. It taught him to be ashamed of me. He didn't see my old truck as a choice. He saw it as a failure. He didn't see my small house as a living memory of his mother. He saw it as a burden. He had decided I was a poor old man, a retired middle manager, scraping by on a meager pension. And he was treating me exactly the way he believed a poor old man deserved to be treated. The silence grew unbearable for them. They had expected me to argue to defend myself, perhaps even to cry. Lacey broke it, forcing a bright, brittle smile. But we're not monsters, Lionel. We're family. We look out for each other. That was when Darren slid the folder across the table. I pulled some strings, he said, squaring his shoulders a little, finally finding his footing. I got you a job at my company so you can feel useful again. Cover your own medical bills. I opened the folder. My hands didn't even tremble. I read the contract. Employee Lionel Fairwood, position Senior Sanitation Associate. Senior Sanitation Associate, I said aloud. The corporate language was almost funny. It's a janitor, Dad, Darren said flatly. You'll be on the night crew. It starts Monday, 6 a.m. Lacey beamed. And it's in Darren's building. He'll be your boss's boss's boss. Isn't that wonderful? He'll be able to look out for you. The humiliation was complete. It wasn't just a job. It was a message. They were putting me in my place. The basement. Darren leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Look, I got you in. It's a good union job. Just don't be late. And please, he glanced around, don't embarrass me in front of my team. I looked at the contract. I looked at Darren's arrogant, nervous face. I looked at Lacey's triumphant, cruel smirk. I thought about the call I would be making to Graham Ellery, the CEO of Vidian Dynamics, the man I had personally hired 10 years ago. I thought about the shares, the 100% of the company shares that GC Holdings owned. And then Lionel Fairwood, the extra mouth, looked up from that janitorial contract and smiled a slow, calm smile. Calm? Thank you, son. This is very thoughtful. I'll take it. I start Monday. Darren and Lacey just stared at me. I could see the calculations flickering behind their eyes. They had rehearsed this. They had braced themselves for an argument, for tears, for pleading. They had a whole script ready for managing the difficult old man. They were not prepared for my smile. I glanced down at the janitorial contract one last time. Senior Sanitation Associate. I nearly laughed. My son, the vice president, was handing his father, the billionaire who owned the entire company, a job pushing a mop. I folded the papers neatly and set them back in the folder. I looked up, meeting Lacey's hostile gaze and Darren's cowardly one. All right, I said, my voice quiet and steady. I accept. Thank you, son. It's very thoughtful of you to find me something to do. I'll take the job. The shock in the room was electric. Darren's mouth actually fell open. You will, he stammered. Lacey, to her credit, recovered faster. Her eyes narrowed, searching for a trick. When she found none, the surprise dissolved quickly into a smug, triumphant smirk. Well, she said, settling back in her chair and crossing her arms. That's sensible, Lionel. We're just glad you're not being difficult about it. She reached for her wineglass, her victory lap underway. It's for the best. This way you can start pulling your own weight. Darren worked very hard to get you this chance. I appreciate it. I said, my face a perfect mask of humble gratitude. Darren finally recovered his composure, squaring his shoulders. Right, good. Well, that's settled then. He was the man of the house again, having disposed of the problem of his father. Your shift starts at 6 a.m. sharp on Monday, Lacey announced. She wasn't asking. Do not be late, Lionel. Darren's reputation is on the line here. And please, she added, her voice thick with condescension, use the service entrance. We don't want the other executives getting confused about who you are. 6 a.m., service entrance. I repeated, slowly nodding. Understood. I stood up, pushing back my chair. Thank you both for dinner. It was enlightening. Darren, I'll see you at the office. I walked out of their sprawling house, the one I had covered the down payment on as an anonymous wedding gift, routed through a shell corporation. I passed Lacey's brand new Mercedes, which I knew she couldn't sustain on Darren's salary alone. I passed Darren's Tesla leased with money he was clearly pulling from somewhere it didn't belong. I climbed into my 1998 Chevy Silverado. The engine caught with a low, dependable rumble. This truck had over 280,000 miles on it. It was the first real purchase Rosalind and I had made after we sold our first patent, long before GC Holdings became what it became. My son looked at this truck and felt shame. I drove it and felt home. I pulled away from their perfectly manicured lawn and traveled 3 blocks parking beneath a sputtering streetlight. The facade dropped. The humble, accommodating old man was gone. I reached into the glove compartment past the old maps and a half-empty water bottle and pulled out my other phone. Not the old bar phone Darren knew about, but a military-grade encrypted satellite phone. I dialed a number I had long since memorized. It rang once. "Clifford." A crisp voice answered without delay. "Lionel, it's 9 p.m. on a Sunday. Is everything all right? Did you enjoy the dinner with your son, Clifford Vega, my asset manager, my chief legal counsel, and for 30 years my closest confidant, the only man alive who knew the full truth?" "The dinner was illuminating, Clifford," I said, staring out at the darkness. "Darren is very concerned that I'm not contributing in my retirement." There was a pause. Clifford was a man who understood nuance. "Sir, what does that mean?" "It means my son just got me a job. A job, sir. A consultancy, a board seat." I chuckled a cold, dry sound. "A janitor, Clifford. He got me a job as a janitor at Vidian Dynamics." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete, I could hear the static. Clifford knew exactly what that meant. Vidian Dynamics wasn't just another holding in my portfolio. It was my flagship. Lionel and Rosalind Holdings. GC Holdings had its beginnings in our garage. We built it on software patents and careful strategic investments. Today it was a private equity behemoth worth billions. Vidian Dynamics, the tech giant where my son held a vice president's title, was our crown jewel. We owned it 100% of it. My son had no idea he was a mid-level employee inside his own father's empire. He assumed GC Holdings was just some faceless offshore entity that owned the building. He had never once bothered to look up what those initials stood for. He only knew he wasn't about to feed an extra mouth. Sir Clifford finally said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "What are you going to do? I can liquidate his position in the morning. I can call Graham Ellery." "No," I interrupted. "You'll do nothing of the sort. I'm taking the job. I start Monday. You're gonna mop floors." "I'm gonna mop floors. My son thinks I'm a burden. He thinks I'm a fool. He thinks I'm worthless. It's time I found out exactly why he's so desperate to have me under his thumb cleaning his office." I had already seen the financials. I knew Darren and Lacey were spending money they didn't have. But this was an escalation. This was personal. This was greedy and cruel. He didn't simply want me out of the way. He wanted me humiliated. He wanted me right where he could watch me powerless. "Clifford," I said, the engine humming beneath me, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to activate a protocol red assessment for the entire executive floor at Vidian, effective immediately. A protocol red." Clifford said, the surprise gone, replaced by the sharp focus of a predator. "Sir, that's a full forensic audit. It's aggressive." "I know what it is," I said. "My son is hiding something, Clifford. Something beyond just being an ungrateful child. He's concealing something inside that company. He wouldn't have placed me inside the building if he wasn't. He's arrogant. He thinks I'm a senile old man." "I'll have the team ready by morning," Clifford said. "Good," I replied. "My son just handed me a master key to his entire operation. I intend to use it." 6 a.m., Monday. The alarm on my old bar phone buzzed angrily on the nightstand. I didn't need it. I'd been awake since 4. I looked at the uniform laid out across my bed. A stiff cotton blend, jumpsuit, a dull shade of dark green. The name Lionel was stitched in white thread over the right pocket. It had been 40 years since I last wore a uniform, and that one belonged to the United States Army. This one smelled of industrial bleach and defeat. I put it on. The fabric was rough against my skin. I drove my old Silverado across town, not to the executive parking garage where my reserved spot, C-101, had sat empty for a year, but to the employee overflow lot, Section G, half a mile from Nixara Tower. I walked through the cold morning air, past the loading docks, past the humming generators. I found the service entrance just as Lacey had directed, a heavy windowless metal door beside the dumpsters. A man named Sal, the shift supervisor, was waiting for me. He had tired eyes and a coffee-stained mustache. He didn't look at me, he looked at the clipboard in his hand. "Fairwood Lionel," he mumbled. "You're the new guy, VP Fairwood's old man, huh?" "That's me," I said. He sighed a long rattling sound. "Look, I don't know what kind of strings your son pulled to get you in here, but down here, you're just a number. Don't be late. Don't steal, don't sleep on the clock, and stay clear of the executives." "Understood." He handed me a gray plastic ID card. "Lee, Fairwood Facilities Management." Then he handed me a heavy ring of keys and a master key card. The irony made my stomach clench. "This," he said, slapping the handle of a heavy yellow cart, "is your new office." It was stocked with a mop, a bucket on wheels, and a dozen spray bottles. "Your assignment is floor 18, executive row." He looked at me for the first time. "They want it spotless before they arrive at 8. Messiest floor in the building, you ask me. These VPs live like pigs. Especially that Fairwood guy's office. My son, the vice president. A pig. Your break room is in the sub-basement with the boilers," Sal continued. "Don't use the executive lounge. Don't use the main elevators." Got it. I pushed the rattling cart into the freight elevator. The metal doors groaned shut, and the smell of grease and disinfectant filled my nose. I was invisible. At 7:30 a.m., I was on floor 18. It was silent. The air conditioning whispered. The carpet was so thick my cartwheels barely made a sound. The entire floor was done in dark wood and brushed steel. It smelled like expensive coffee and quiet power. I started with the main corridor running directly outside Darren's corner office. The glass wall looked out over the whole city. On the door, a polished silver nameplate read, "Darren Fairwood, Vice President, Strategic Acquisitions." Strategic Acquisitions. I remembered when he'd landed that promotion. He'd called me bursting with pride. I didn't tell him that I, as the sole owner of GC Holdings, had personally approved the creation of that department. I dipped the heavy mop into the bucket, wrung it out, and set to work on the marble floor. The slap and swish of the wet strings against the stone was the only sound in the hall. At 8:05, the main elevator bank dinged. I heard his voice before I saw him, that loud, booming laugh he used when he was working to impress someone. I quickly pushed my cart to the side of the corridor, pressing my back against the wall, just as Sal had instructed. "Stay out of the way." Darren walked out flanked by 2 other executives, both in suits that probably ran $5,000 apiece. Darren was in the middle, holding court over a story about his golf game over the weekend. So I told the guy, Darren was saying, "If you can't handle the heat, stay off my green." They moved toward me. I could see my own reflection in the polished marble I had just mopped. A 71-year-old black man in a cheap uniform gripping a mop, waiting for his son to pass. They were 5 feet away. Darren glanced up from his story. His eyes found mine. I saw it. A flicker, a flash of recognition. He saw me, and then nothing. His gaze passed straight through me. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He didn't tense. He didn't acknowledge my existence in any form. I was a smudge on the wall. I was a piece of furniture. I was the air. He turned back to his colleagues, laughing at his own punchline. They walked past me. The scent of Darren's cologne, a brand I had bought him for his 40th birthday, drifted over me. And then he was gone, swallowed by his corner office, leaving me alone in the hallway, with my heart frozen in my chest. I stood there a full minute, both hands locked around the mop handle. My son had just looked through me as though I didn't exist. I thought back to standing in the pouring rain at the Charlotte airport, waiting to collect him. He was coming home from his Wharton MBA interview, certain he had failed. "I blew it, Dad," he'd said, his voice unsteady. "I'll never get in. I'm not smart enough." I didn't tell him that GC Holdings had just endowed a new anonymous scholarship fund at Wharton for promising minority candidates. I didn't tell him his acceptance was effectively guaranteed before he ever sat down for the interview. I had paid nearly $500,000 for that education, for that confidence, and he had just strolled past me like I was a ghost. I drew a slow, shuddering breath. I forced my hands to loosen their grip. I dipped the mop back into the bucket. The main elevator dinged again. This time, it was Lacey. She wasn't dressed for work. She had on expensive-looking yoga pants and a designer top, her phone in one hand, and a large steaming cappuccino in the other. She was here to perform. She was here to be seen by her husband's colleagues. She spotted me immediately. Unlike Darren, she didn't ignore me. She smiled a wide, sharp, predatory smile. "Oh my goodness!" she said, her voice cutting through the quiet of the executive floor. It was loud enough for Darren's colleagues in the nearby glass offices to take notice. "Lionel, you made it day one." I just nodded, leaning on my mop. "Lacey, good morning. It's just so wonderful what Darren did for you." She continued, her heels clicking across the marble as she closed the distance between us. "Giving you a purpose, keeping you active in your golden years." I said nothing. "Well, I'm just here to drop off Darren's." She drew out the next words. "My husband, the vice president's dry cleaning." She moved a step past me, and then, oh, how clumsy, her hand jerked. The cappuccino cup tilted. Hot, milky coffee splashed across the floor. I had just polished and spattered down the front of my dark green uniform pants, the heat stinging through the fabric. "Oh, clumsy me!" She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in a flawless imitation of horror. She looked down at the spreading puddle, then looked directly at me. Her eyes were bright, challenging, and bright with undisguised pleasure. "You'll get that, won't you, Lionel?" She asked, her voice sweet as poison. "It's what you're here for, right?" I caught a distinct snicker from a secretary who had drifted to her doorway to watch. Lacey smiled, satisfied. She turned and walked away, hips swinging, leaving me standing alone in a puddle of her spilled coffee. I spent the next 2 hours on my hands and knees scrubbing Lacey's cappuccino stain out of the marble grout. My uniform was damp and smelled of soured milk. Each time an executive moved through the hall, I pressed myself against the wall, invisible again. But I was far from invisible. I was watching. I was beginning to understand what Darren and Lacey were doing. This wasn't simply about humiliating me. This was a performance. Around 10 a.m., Darren stepped out of his office with a colleague. He stopped directly in front of me as I polished the brass fixtures near the elevator. "Dad," he said loudly, his voice loaded with performed concern. "You keeping up? Make sure you take your breaks. Don't overdo it." "Okay." The colleague, a woman in a sharp pantsuit, smiled over at Darren. "Is that your father, Darren? Oh, that is so sweet of you helping him out like this." Darren placed a hand on my shoulder, heavy, proprietary. "He's family," he said, shaking his head with a small sigh. "You've got to take care of family even when it's, difficult." "You're a good man, Darren," the woman said, clearly impressed. I saw it then, the whole ugly picture. I wasn't a burden, I was a prop, a walking, talking advertisement for what a devoted son Darren was. He wasn't simply hiding his shame. He was weaponizing my presence. He was using my janitor's uniform to earn goodwill with his colleagues, to build himself an image as a humble, dutiful son, tending to his poor, aging father. Lacey had done the same. Spilling the cappuccino wasn't just cruelty. It was a power play stage in front of the secretaries. It told them she was a woman with authority, someone who could give orders to anyone, including her husband's own father. They weren't merely ungrateful. They were strategic. My son had taken one real lesson from his expensive Wharton education: how to leverage an asset. And I, his father, was his newest one. I just smiled my humble, tired smile. "Thank you, son. I'm doing just fine. Don't you worry about me." "Attaboy," he said, patting my shoulder once more before steering his colleague away. I finished the brass work and pushed my cart toward the service elevator, the one I was permitted to use, the one beside the trash chute. I pressed the down button, my mind moving fast. Darren was arrogant, so arrogant that he had brought the one man he should be keeping at a distance directly into the heart of his operation. He put me on the executive floor. He handed me a master key. He thought I was a senile old man. He had no idea he had just invited the wolf into the hen house. The freight elevator doors groaned open. I pushed my cart inside. The doors were nearly closed when a hand shot between them. "Hold that, please," said a voice. Graham Ellery, the chief executive officer of Vidian Dynamics, stepped into the freight elevator beside me. He was in a perfectly tailored suit leather briefcase in hand, brow furrowed over his phone. "Thanks for holding it," he said, not yet looking up. "I'm heading down to the labs." He finally raised his eyes from the screen and saw me. His gaze, sharp, intelligent, moved across my face. I watched the moment recognition arrived. His jaw went slack. His briefcase slipped from his fingers and struck the grimy elevator floor with a dull thud. "Mr. Fairwood," he stammered. "Graham Ellery. I had pulled him out of a mid-level management role at a rival company 10 years ago. Rosalind and I had shared dinner with him and his wife Diane just before she passed. I had seen what he was capable of. I had trained him. I had placed the keys to this billion-dollar kingdom in his hands. And now he was staring at his mentor, His boss, the sole owner of the entire company, holding a dirty mop in a janitor's uniform. I slowly raised one finger to my lips. Shh. The elevator doors sealed shut around us. The car hummed. "Sir," Graham whispered, his face drained of color. "What is this? Is this a test? A security audit? Did I do something wrong?" "Calm down, Graham," I said. My voice was different now. The stooped, humble old man was gone. This was the voice of the chairman of GC Holdings. "You've done nothing wrong. You're here. You're using the freight elevator, that's good. Leading by example. But the uniform, the mop, I don't understand." "It's a family matter, Graham. My son Darren Fairwood believes I'm a poor, retired old man. He believes I'm an extra mouth to feed. So he kindly arranged this position for me." Graham's face moved from pale to a deep, dark red. The fury was instant. "Darren, your son put you here. I'll have him fired. I'll call security. I'll have his desk cleared before this elevator reaches the lobby." "No," I said, my voice sharp. "You will do exactly nothing. You have not seen me. This conversation never happened. I am Lionel Fairwood, the new janitor. Nothing more. Do you understand, Graham?" A man who commanded a workforce of 5,000 employees simply nodded. "Yes, sir. But," I continued, "there is something I need from you. I need you to call Clifford Vega. Tell him I said to activate a protocol red assessment for the entire 18th floor effective immediately." Graham's eyes went wide. "Protocol red, sir, that's a full forensic audit. It will freeze Darren's accounts, his projects. It will flag everything. I know what it is, Graham. I invented it." The elevator dinged and the doors parted onto the lobby. "You get out here," I said. "I'm heading to the sub-basement. My break room is with the boilers." Graham stepped out speechless. "Yes, sir, Mr. Fairwood." "Graham," I said just before the doors came together. He turned. "Good job on the quarterly reports. The Asian market numbers were very strong." The doors closed, leaving me alone again in the smell of grease. The game had just changed. My son thought I was a prop. He was about to learn that I was the stage manager. He had been arrogant enough to place me on the executive floor, and he was hiding something. I was going to find out what it was. The executive floor of Vidian Dynamics is a different creature at 11 p.m. The silence sits heavy, almost sacred. The lights drop to a low, respectful glow that plays off the dark wood and glass. My official shift had ended an hour before. I had watched Sal and the rest of the night crew pack up their tired laughter trailing behind them as they headed for the freight elevator. I was supposed to be among them. Instead, I'd stayed back pretending to organize the supply closet on floor 17. Now, I was alone. I pushed my silent cart back to floor 18 and stood outside Darren's corner office. The silver nameplate Darren Fairwood glinted faintly in the emergency lighting. The glass walls were dark, throwing my own tired face back at me, an old man in a dark green janitor's uniform. I reached into my pocket and drew out the heavy keyring Sal had given me. It sat cold and solid in my palm. Among the many small metal keys, there was one plastic card, Facilities Management Master. My son had given me this job to put me in my place. What he had actually given me was the key to his kingdom. I held the card up to the black scanner on the wall. A quiet beep, a soft thunk as the magnetic lock gave way. The light on the handle turned green. I pushed the heavy glass door open and slipped inside, pulling my empty trash cart in behind me just in case. Darren's office was just like him, large, cold, and desperate to impress. A massive mahogany desk occupied the center of the room, perfectly bare, no papers. Darren was the kind of man who believed a clean desk signaled a clear mind. He was wrong. Usually it just means an empty one. The air carried a faint trace of expensive cologne and stale coffee. On the wall opposite the floor-to-ceiling windows hung a massive whiteboard covered in notes. I pushed my cart closer. This wasn't brainstorming. This was a battle plan. A single word was circled at the top, in red marker innovate. I recognized it immediately. My pulse ticked a little faster. Below the name ran a flowchart, timelines, projections, and a number that made my stomach drop. $50 million. This was a full-scale acquisition plan. Lists of stakeholder benefits, marketing strategies, integration timelines. A dotted line pointed to a date circled in black. Final board vote Friday. 3 days away. I stood there staring at the board, the pieces locking into place with a horrifying, sickening snap. Darren was pushing this. Pushing it hard. fast-tracking a $50 million deal. I looked more carefully at the margins. Notes I didn't recognize. M liaison secure, brokerage account cleared, FV confirmed. It was code. My son was writing in code inside his own office. I crossed to his desk and ran my hand along the polished wood. Nothing. I tried the drawers. Locked, of course. But the janitor's master keyring carried small metal keys as well. The second one I tried clicked the top drawer open. Inside, only a few things: expensive pens, a box of cigars, and a printed pitch book. The cover was glossy. Innovate the future of AI integration. I flipped through it. It was garbage. I didn't need to read the whole thing. I had already seen it. 3 months earlier, Clifford Vega had brought this exact proposal to my home office. Lionel, he'd said, "This Innovate just crossed our radar. Vidian's R&D department is sniffing around it." We had spent exactly 1 hour vetting it. My team at GC Holdings. The real team, the ones who manage my billions, had torn it apart. The company was a shell. 2 employees. Its core proprietary algorithm was little more than poorly disguised open-source code. It was, as Clifford had put it, a pig in lipstick. Their valuation was pure fantasy. They were asking $50 million for a company I wouldn't have paid $5 million for. I had made the call myself. "Kill it, Clifford," I'd said, "and find out who at Vidian is foolish enough to be pushing it." I never got a name. Graham Ellery had reported back that the inquiry appeared to have died. But it hadn't died. It had only gone underground. And the man driving this $50 million scam, this corporate poison pill, was my own son. This wasn't poor judgment. This wasn't incompetence. Darren was intelligent. He had his MBA. He knew how to read a balance sheet. He knew this was a garbage deal, which meant this wasn't a question of competence. This was crime. My son, my only son, was attempting to defraud my company. But why? Why risk his entire career, his reputation, his freedom for a deal this rotten? There had to be a personal connection, a kickback, something. I turned to his desktop computer. The screen was black. I tapped the spacebar and it came alive, showing a photo of him and Lacey on a beach smiling. The login prompt glowed. Password. He was arrogant, but he was also sentimental. I knew him, or at least I believed I did. I tried his birthday. Access denied. I tried Lacey's birthday. Access denied. I tried Vidian one. Access denied. I sighed. I looked at the photo of him and Lacey, and then I thought about his mother, the woman who had been the center of his world and mine. I typed in her name and the year she was born. Carita, 1955. The screen flashed. Welcome, Darren Fairwood. A wave of deep sadness moved through me. He was still carrying his mother's name as the key to his life, even as he betrayed everything she and I had spent our lives building. I ignored his work files. I went straight to his personal drive, a folder labeled Projects. Inside another folder, Innovate Private. I double-clicked it. A new window opened. This folder is encrypted. Please enter password. He was concealing something his mother's name alone couldn't unlock. A separate password. He was smart enough for that, at least. I studied the encrypted folder. What would he use? Not his mother's name. He'd already given that to the main login. This was something different. This was where he kept his real secrets. I thought about my son, the man I knew, or believed I knew. Arrogant, sentimental, and completely controlled by his wife. What did they truly value? I typed in the name of the resort where they spent their anniversaries. Access denied. I typed in the name of the street they lived on, the house I owned. Access denied. I sat in the silence of his dark office in my janitor's uniform, scratching my neck. What was the single thing they worshipped above everything else? The thing they were prepared to risk everything to obtain? It wasn't love, it wasn't family. I thought about the designer handbag Lacey had been carrying, the one she had announced proudly cost more than a used car. I typed in money. Access denied. Too simple, I thought again. It was about the image of money. I typed in the name of Lacey's favorite designer brand, the one she always mispronounced. Lewis. Access denied. I exhaled, frustrated. Then I looked back at the whiteboard. The codes. FV confirmed. M liaison. This was about her. I tried her maiden name, Lacey Holbrook. The folder shimmered and opened. My son's private encrypted password was his wife's name. A woman he had known for only 5 years, not the mother who had raised him for 40. It was a small betrayal, but it cut deep. The folder held no spreadsheets. It was packed with scanned documents, legal forms, bank statements, and a subfolder simply labeled offshore. My blood went cold. I clicked it. Inside a single file. Certificate of Incorporation, M.D. Enterprises, LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands. I scanned the document. My eyes moved quickly down the page to the signature line, to the sole listed officer and owner of the company. My hands began to tremble. It wasn't Darren. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was her mother. Lacey's mother, a woman I knew for a fact, was a retired school teacher living in Indiana. She had no resources to found any enterprise. This was a front. I clicked on the next file, a banking transfer authorization, routing all funds from MD Enterprises to a secondary account. The name on that account, Lacey Holbrook, her maiden name. I leaned back in Darren's $1,400 ergonomic chair, the one I had paid for, and felt the air leave my body. I understood everything. Innovate the future of AI integration was a lie. A worthless shell company, a corporate ghost. And its secret 90% stakeholder was my daughter-in-law, Lacey. My son, Darren Fairwood, a vice president of Vidian Dynamics, was using his executive authority and his influence with the board of directors to push through a $50 million acquisition of his own wife's worthless company. This wasn't a bad deal. This wasn't a conflict of interest. This was grand larceny. This was corporate fraud on a massive scale. He was trying to steal $50 million from GC Holdings. He was trying to steal $50 million from me. And the janitor job, the humiliation, the spilled cappuccino, all of it snapped into focus. It wasn't just arrogance. It wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. He needed me here. He needed me close. He needed me somewhere he could see me. He put me in a janitor's uniform to ensure I was powerless to reinforce to everyone himself, included that I was just a helpless old man. He put me on the executive floor so I could watch him close the deal that would make him rich, all while I was busy emptying his trash can. The audacity of it, the sheer breathtaking nerve of the plan. And I finally understood why he and Lacey were always so desperate for money. I remembered every complaint about country club fees, her sighs about needing a new car, her dream of a Vail vacation. I had seen the financial red flags Clifford Vega had shown me. They were drowning in debt, running a life built on borrowed money and deception. In my naivety, I had assumed Darren was simply irresponsible. I'd even considered reaching out offering him a generous retirement bonus from my own accounts to lighten his load. I told myself his stress came from trying to provide for that woman. I was a fool. His stress wasn't from work. His stress was from fraud. This $50 million deal wasn't about clearing a few credit card balances. This was their big payday. This was their get-rich-quick scheme, the heist that would turn the lie they were living into something real. They didn't just want my help. They wanted my company. My hand had begun to tremble, not from grief, not from fear. It was trembling from a cold, precise, and quiet rage. I turned back to the screen. One last file sat in the folder, an email thread. I clicked it open. It was an exchange between Darren's work account and a private address I recognized as Lacey's. The subject line read, Friday. I read the words my son had written. It's all set, baby. The board meeting is confirmed for Friday at 10 a.m. Ellery is still on the fence, but the other VPs are hungry for an AI acquisition. I've convinced them this is our only shot. It's the perfect time. Lacey had written back, what about your father? You said he was getting suspicious about our finances. What if he says something? What if he tries to interfere? I scrolled to the final message, the one Darren had sent just 2 days ago, the day before he'd offered me the job. I read his words, and whatever remained of my heart for him turned to stone. Don't worry about the old man, he wrote. I handled it. He was complaining about being bored in retirement, about not having purpose. So, I got him a job. I read the next line 3 times. This new janitor job is perfect. It's the perfect cover. He'll be so busy scrubbing floors, he won't have time to ask questions. He'll be right under my nose, and he won't see a thing. Board meeting is Friday. By this time next week, we'll be in Bora Bora. I closed the laptop. Bora Bora. He had used my humiliation as a distraction. He had made me a prop in his criminal scheme. I rose slowly to my feet. I looked around the dark, empty office. The glass walls threw the city lights back at me from far below. My city, my company. Friday, I whispered into the silence. You think you have until Friday, son. I pushed my cleaning cart out of the office. The lock clicked shut at my back. You don't. I spent the next day cleaning. I scrubbed the bathrooms. I emptied the trash cans. I vacuumed the thick carpets. I polished the glass walls until my shoulders ached. I did exactly what I was told. I stayed invisible. Darren and Lacey left me alone, but their sense of victory hung in the air around me. I was the tamed animal. I was the old man who had learned his lesson. On Wednesday, Lacey came back. I knew she would. That kind of cruelty operates like a drug, and she needed another fix. I was outside the main conference room, wiping down the mahogany doors when the elevator dinged. She stepped out this time in a sharp red dress. She wasn't headed to yoga. She had dressed for an audience. She spotted me, and her face lit up with that same cutting, superior smile. "Lionel," she said, her voice bright, still at it. "I am just so impressed. I honestly thought you'd have quit by now. I guess beggars can't be choosers, right?" I just nodded, eyes cast downward, working a cloth in slow circles across the wood. "Good morning, ma'am. Just earning my keep." She walked right up to me. She was carrying a paper pastry bag and a fresh cup of tea. "I brought a blueberry muffin," she said. But oh dear. She took a bite, and a scatter of crumbs rained down onto the dark carpet I had just vacuumed. "So messy," she sighed. Then she glanced at her cup. "And this cappuccino? It's cold." She didn't accidentally spill it this time. There was no pretense. She looked straight into my eyes. She held the cup out and then slowly, deliberately turned it upside down. Hot liquid and foam poured onto the carpet, spreading into a dark, steaming puddle right at my feet. She crushed the pastry bag and the empty cup into a ball and dropped it onto the mess. "You clean that up," she said. Her voice was flat, a simple command, and this time she added, grinding the trash into the carpet with the toe of her expensive red heel. "Try to get all of it. I saw you missed a spot yesterday. We do have standards on the executive floor." She was testing me. She was staking her claim. She was proving to herself and to the secretary watching from a nearby desk that she was the one in control, that she could make her husband's father kneel. I looked at the garbage on the floor. I looked at her, this small, hollow, cruel woman who had my son wound around her finger, and I gave her my best humble, broken smile. "Yes, ma'am," I whispered, letting my voice sound unsteady. "Right away. I'm sorry." She laughed, a short, barking, satisfied sound. She turned and walked away, heels clicking on the marble, leaving me there with her mess. I watched her go. My smile vanished. I bent down slowly, knees cracking, and began to gather up the soggy paper bag. She believed she had won. She thought she was cementing the hierarchy. She had no idea what I had actually been doing. At 5 o'clock that morning, while she lay sleeping, dreaming of Vale and Bora Bora, I wasn't just cleaning Darren's office. I was in the main server room on the 4th floor. My facilities management master key didn't only open office doors. It opened the locked steel panel on the server rack. I had plugged a compact high-speed data drive, disguised as an ordinary USB phone charger, directly into the backup server for the entire 18th floor. While Lacey was dreaming of spending my money, I was downloading 2 terabytes of everything. It wasn't just Darren's computer anymore. It was every email, every instant message, every deleted file, every keystroke from every executive on that floor. I had the real financials for Innovate. I had the wire transfer receipts from Darren's offshore account to his wife's shell corporation. I had the deleted messages between Darren and the company's legal department, where he pressured them to fast-track the valuation, regardless of the red flags. I drew the small drive from the pocket of my uniform. It was warm against my palm. This tiny piece of plastic wasn't just evidence. It was a $50 million bomb. I finished cleaning the coffee stain, my hands moving now, with a new sense of purpose. I pushed my rattling cart into the freight elevator. The moment the heavy steel door slid shut, I was a different man. I pulled out my satellite phone. I pressed one. Clifford Lionel. His voice was crisp. "I've been waiting for your call. The audit team is in place." "Change of plans." "Clifford," I said. "The audit is off. This is bigger than we thought. I have the drive. I have everything." He didn't just try to defraud the company, he actively coerced the legal department and falsified valuation reports. It's airtight. "What are your orders, Lionel?" "It's time to set the trap," I said. "The board meeting is Friday at 10 a.m. I want you there. I want the entire board of GC Holdings there. Fly them in. I don't care what it costs." "They'll be there," Clifford said. "What about Darren?" "He's expecting to present his opportunity to Graham Ellery and a handful of local VPs. He's not expecting the owners. And he is certainly not expecting me." I drew a slow breath. And Clifford, one more round of calls. I'm sending you this data packet right now, encrypt it, and forward copies to your contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI. I want federal agents inside that building on Friday. I want them waiting in the lobby. There was a pause. It's done. Clifford said, "Sir, are you sure you want to do this to him? He is your son." I sat with his question. Was I sure? I looked down at my hands, rough and red from the cleaning chemicals. I looked at the coffee stain on my cheap uniform pants. I thought of Rosalind. Rosalind and I had built this company on a single simple promise to one another. Our motto was carved into the foundation stone of this very building, a stone Darren had probably never once stopped to read. Integrity above all. We built this empire to hand our son a legacy, not a piggy bank. Darren wasn't just stealing $50 million. He was spitting on his mother's grave. He was erasing the only thing that mattered. He stopped being my son Clifford the moment he chose to become a criminal. I said, my voice cold as steel. This isn't about family anymore. Before I show you what I uncovered, what my own son had truly been doing right under my roof and on my payroll, let me ask you this. If someone you loved was quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait, watch, and let the truth build its own case? This is about honor. I burned them to the ground. I hung up. The elevator doors parted. I pushed my cart back onto the 18th floor. I was just a janitor again. Darren was waiting outside his office. He looked agitated, shifting his weight foot to foot. "Where have you been?" he snapped. "Someone said you were on an extended break. That's your second one this morning. Are you trying to get yourself fired?" I shuffled forward. "Just catching my breath, son. This kind of work is hard on an old man." Darren sneered, not even registering that I'd called him son. "Right. Well, listen up. Friday, that's 2 days from now. There's a major board meeting on this floor. Major, I'm presenting. I don't want you anywhere near here. I don't want the smell of bleach and failure hanging over my presentation." I held his gaze. "My son, you are assigned to the basement," he said. "You'll be cleaning the boiler room the entire day. Do you understand me?" He was sending me to the furnace as far from the boardroom as he could manage. He thought he was banishing me. He didn't realize he was simply clearing the stage. I put on my most humble, defeated smile. "Yes, sir. Whatever you say, boss. The basement it is." Friday, 10 o'clock in the morning, I was not in the basement. Darren had sent me down to the boiler room, to the dark and the damp, as far from his moment of triumph as the building allowed, but I had disobeyed my boss. I pushed my rattling yellow cart along the corridor of the 18th floor. The carpet was so thick it swallowed the sound of the wheels. The air was still and cool, carrying the scent of expensive leather and old money. I kept my head down my janitor's uniform, blending into the shadows. Just the old man, the invisible cleaner, forgotten and ignored exactly as I had intended. I stopped my cart just outside the main boardroom. The twin mahogany doors were massive and closed tight, but I could hear him. My son Darren. His voice was broad-assured and utterly hollow. He was giving the performance of his life. I didn't just lean against the wall. I pulled out a small bottle of glass cleaner and a microfiber cloth. I began to polish the brass plaque beside the door. The Rosalind Fairwood Memorial Conference Room, the name my son walked past every single day and had clearly stopped meaning anything to him. As I worked, I pressed a tiny flesh-colored receiver into my ear. 2 nights earlier, while emptying the trash in this very room, I had planted a high-fidelity microphone under the main conference table. His voice came through crisp and close in my head, as though he were whispering his lies directly to me. And so, Gentleman Darren was saying, this isn't just an acquisition. It is a paradigm shift. It is the cornerstone of our entire next-generation strategy. Their proprietary algorithm will allow us to vertically integrate our AI logistics and capture an untapped market share valued at over $200 million in the first 3 years alone. Proprietary algorithm. I had to stop myself from laughing out loud. I had looked at the code myself. It was a cheap knockoff of an open-source program from 6 years ago. The asking price, Darren continued, his voice dropping to a grave conspiratorial tone, is $50 million. Now, I know that sounds steep. I know it does. I caught a glimpse of him through the sliver of glass in the door. He was pacing. He was commanding the room. He was the perfect portrait of a hotshot vice president. But this is a rare opportunity. Innovate is lean. They are fast. And they are already fielding offers from our competitors. This is not the time to hesitate. This is the time to be bold. This window, gentlemen, is closing. He was lying. I knew for a fact that Innovate wasn't fielding any offers. They were bleeding money and were 3 weeks from bankruptcy, which was exactly why Lacey was so desperate. I glanced through the glass again and spotted her. Lacey? She wasn't seated at the main table, of course. That would have been too obvious. She occupied one of the leather chairs along the back wall in the guest section. She was playing the role of the devoted wife there to witness her husband's grand moment. She had on an ivory blazer and skirt, looking every inch the part of a future tycoon's wife. She watched Darren with an expression of undisguised adoration. Or perhaps it was greed. With her, it had always been difficult to tell the two apart. She believed they were seconds away from $50 million. She thought they had won. She thought I was in the basement scrubbing rust. Darren advanced to his final slide. It showed the Vidian logo shaking hands with the Innovate logo. This deal is about synergy, he said. It's about the future. I've spent 6 months on this, nurturing this relationship, running the numbers. It is my professional opinion that this is the single most important move this company can make. I urge this board in the strongest possible terms to approve the expenditure. Let's make this happen. Thank you. He finished. I heard polite applause. My son, the con man, had delivered a masterful performance. I stood beside my mop bucket heart, beating a slow, cold, heavy rhythm. This was it. The moment of the vote. The moment he would steal $50 million from his own family. A chair scraped. It was Graham Ellery, the CEO, the man I had hired. Thank you, Darren. Graham's voice came through my earpiece perfectly composed. That was an impressive presentation. The passion you bring to this project is noted. I could picture Darren swelling with pride. And Ellery continued, I agree this is a major decision. $50 million is a significant expenditure, which is precisely why I felt it would be inappropriate for us, as mere managers of this company, to make it alone. I heard Darren shift uneasily. Graham, what do you mean we're the board? This is our job. You are the Vidian board, Darren. Ellery said, his voice hardening by a fraction. But Vidian Dynamics is a wholly owned subsidiary, and on matters exceeding $20 million, our parent company has final authority. The parent company. Darren's voice climbed higher. GC Holdings. They're an offshore fund. They don't get involved in daily operations. Aye, they do today, Ellery replied. My grip tightened on the handle of my mop. This was my cue. In fact, Ellery said, his voice now carrying across the room. We are privileged to have a special guest with us this morning. He flew in specifically for this meeting. He is the sole representative and, as it happens, the founder and sole owner of GC Holdings. I heard a sharp intake of breath. It was Lacey. I heard Darren sputtering. A guest? What who? He's not on the schedule. I didn't approve this. He doesn't need your approval, Darren, Ellery said. I dropped the glass cleaner into my bucket with a clank. I pushed the rattling cart straight up to the mahogany doors. Gentlemen of the board, Graham Ellery's voice rang out. Please rise and help me welcome your actual boss. The heavy mahogany doors swung open and I stood there. Lionel Fairwood, 71 years old, in a damp coffee-stained janitor's uniform, holding a dirty mop. I looked past the stunned faces of the vice presidents. I looked past the horrified, gaping expression of Graham Ellery, a brilliant CEO and a terrible actor. I looked straight at my son, his face. His face moved through confusion, then rage, and then for the very first time, pure unguarded terror. I left the mop cart in the hallway. I walked slowly into the boardroom. The click of my old work boots on the marble floor was the only sound. Every eye was on me. The full executive board, 12 men and women in $1,000 suits, stared in total bewilderment. They looked at my stained uniform. They looked at my work boots. They looked at my face, 71 years old and worn. I didn't stop at the back. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight up the center aisle alongside the long, polished mahogany table. I walked right past my son. I could feel Darren's eyes on me burning with rage and disbelief. I could almost hear his mind screaming. I reached the front of the room, the head of the table where Graham Ellery, the CEO, was standing. He and I faced each other for a moment. The entire room held its breath. And then, just as my son Darren found his voice, it all happened at once. What the hell are you doing in here? Darren's voice was a roar, not a question, an explosion. He had been terrified, but the terror had curdled into something raw and furious. Get out! He screamed, his face blotched an ugly red. Who let him in here? I gave specific orders. He's supposed to be in the basement. He spun toward Graham Ellery, jabbing a finger in my direction. Graham, what is this? Why did you stop my presentation for a janitor security? Get him out of here now. He's fired. He's fired. He took a step toward me, one hand raised as if to seize me, to physically drag me from the room. He had come completely apart. This was his moment of glory, his $50 million payday. And the janitor, his embarrassing old father, was tearing it to pieces. And then Graham Ellery did something that stopped my son dead in his tracks. Graham Ellery, the CEO of Vidian Dynamics. The man Darren worshipped, the man my son had spent months trying to impress, simply raised one hand. Darren, he said. His voice wasn't raised, but it sliced through Darren, screaming like a blade. Shut up. The command was so absolute, so final, that Darren actually flinched. He stopped, mouth half open, hand still suspended in the air. The entire boardroom locked into this horrible, perfect tableau. The raving vice president, the baffled board members, and the old janitor. Graham Ellery dismissed Darren entirely. He ignored the shell-shocked board. He turned to face me. He looked me over, slowly taking in the cheap uniform, the coffee stain on my trousers, the weariness etched into my face. And then, in the dead quiet of that boardroom, Graham Ellery, the CEO, did something no one in that room was prepared for. He bowed, not a nod, a deep, formal, deliberate bow from the waist. The kind of gesture a lieutenant offers a general, the kind a subject offers a king. Mr. Fairwood, Ellery said, his voice carrying a respect that was wholly genuine. Thank you for making the trip on such short notice. We were not expecting you. Please forgive the disruption. He pulled out the grand carved chair at the very head of the table. My chair. The chairman's chair, the one always left empty. Please, he said, join us. From the back of the room came a sound, a small, sharp gasp. It was Lacey. The 12 board members who had been watching this exchange like spectators at a match suddenly understood. They didn't yet know who I was, but they could see that Ellery was terrified of me, and one by one they began to rise. The scraping of their heavy chairs across the marble floor was the only sound in the room. All around the table, the most powerful people in that company were getting to their feet. Not for Darren, not for Ellery, for the janitor. I looked at my son. He was still rooted in the middle of the room. His face had gone from red to a sickly drained white. Every drop of color had left it. He was staring at Ellery. He was staring at the board members standing in quiet deference. He was staring at me, the man he had ordered to the basement. He could not reconcile the two realities. His mind simply refused to bridge them. Graham, what is this? He stammered. What are you doing? This is my father. He's the janitor. Graham Ellery finally turned to look at Darren. The respect was gone from his face. What replaced it was a mask of cold, controlled fury. You are correct on one point, Darren. Ellery said, his voice like ice. This is your father. Then he turned back to me. Sir, he said. I gave a single nod. I walked past him. I sat down in the chairman's chair. It fit perfectly. I set my old calloused hands flat on the polished mahogany. I looked across the stunned faces of the board. And then finally, I looked at my son. Darren, I said. My voice was quiet. It carried the length of that silent room. He flinched as though I had struck him. He was shaking his head, a small, rapid, desperate denial. No, he whispered. No, it's not. You're not. His eyes were wide with a dawning horror that was more satisfying than any revenge I could have designed. He looked at my name on the agenda, Lionel Fairwood. He looked at the company name on the wall, Vidian Dynamics. He looked at the parent company listed in the documents before him, G.C. Holdings. G.C. Holdings. Lionel Rosalind. His mother. His father. I watched the precise moment his entire world came apart. The moment he understood that he hadn't merely been ungrateful, he had been a fool. Sir. Fairwood. He whispered the name. A question, an accusation, a plea. You are G.C. Holdings. I leaned forward in the chairman's chair. The soft leather shifted under my weight. It was the only sound in the room. Yes, son. I said, my voice low, but perfectly audible in that silence. Mr. Fairwood, that's the name on the door. It's the name on the building. It's the name on your paycheck. I let that settle. G.C. Holdings, I said, pressing my fingers to the mahogany table. Lionel Rosalind, your mother. The company we started in our garage while you were asleep in your crib. The company I built with my own hands while you were away at the university I paid for. Darren just stood there swaying slightly like a man who had absorbed a blow to the stomach. I am the founder, I said, my voice lifting just a fraction. I am the sole owner. I am the man who signs Graham Ellery's checks and Ellery signs yours. So, yes, Darren, you work for me. The color abandoned his face entirely. His lips moved without making a sound, and then a shriek erupted from the back of the room. It was Lacey. She was on her feet, face twisted with furious disbelief, hands knotted into fists. No, she screamed, her voice cracking apart. That's a lie. You're lying. He's a janitor. He's a poor old man. He lives in a dump. We Darren got him a job. She swept her gaze around the room, hunting for someone to agree. Tell them, Darren. Tell them he's nobody. Tell them he's just your senile old father. Darren said nothing. He couldn't. He stood paralyzed, staring at me as though he were looking at a ghost. She's right about one thing, I said to the board, letting Lacey's hysteria fall away unanswered. I am a janitor. Or I was until about 5 minutes ago. My son was kind enough to give me the position. He said he didn't want to feed an extra mouth. He said I needed to pull my weight, so I did. I reached into the pocket of my uniform. I drew out the small black USB drive, the one disguised as a phone charger. As a janitor, I said, you get a great deal of access. People don't notice you, you hear things, you clean up messes, and sometimes you come across trash. I crossed to the front of the room, to the podium where Darren had just delivered his triumphant presentation. His laptop was still open. I unplugged his machine and connected my drive. What is that? Darren whispered. His voice had gone hoarse. This, I said, is the trash I found in your office, son. I pressed the button. Darren's $50 million presentation vanished from the large screen. In its place, an email thread appeared visible to every person in that boardroom. The subject line, Friday. The sender, Darren Fairwood. The recipient, Lacey Holbrook Private. I read his words aloud. Don't worry about the old man. I handled it. This new janitor job is perfect. He'll be so busy scrubbing floors he won't have time to ask questions. He'll be right under my nose and he won't see a thing. Board meeting is Friday. By this time next week, we'll be in Bora Bora. Another sound from Lacey. Not a shriek of rage this time. A gasp of pure cold terror. She had been caught. You went through my computer, Darren whispered. I emptied your trash can, Darren, just like you told me to. I moved to the next slide. It was the Certificate of Incorporation for MD Enterprises. Registered in the Cayman Islands, sole owner, Lacey's mother. I clicked again. The bank transfer authorizations routing all funds from MD Enterprises to a private account held in Lacey's maiden name. The boardroom was silent as a sealed vault. The VPs were no longer confused. They were watching a public execution. And now, I said, my son's masterpiece of strategic acquisition. I clicked again. A side-by-side comparison filled the screen. On the left, Darren's pitch deck claiming Innovate was worth $50 million. On the right, the GC Holdings forensic audit prepared by Clifford Vega's team. It laid out the company's true condition. It showed the open source code they had stolen. It showed the 2 fictitious employees on their payroll. At the bottom of the screen, in large red letters, sat the actual valuation of Innovate. Estimated value. I read aloud, less than $100,000. You, I said, turning to face Darren, were trying to steal $50 million. You weren't making a bold move. You weren't capturing a market. You were trying to empty the vault. I looked at Lacey. And you, my dear daughter-in-law, you were his accomplice. This wasn't a kickback. This was the whole damn heist. Darren finally broke. No, he said, shaking his head. No, you don't understand the valuation. It's subjective. Subjective. I laughed. It's fraud, son, and you knew it. But you were so arrogant, so blinded by greed and by your contempt for me, that you did the single stupidest thing a criminal can possibly do. I stepped back from the podium. I walked straight up to him. He flinched, but I stopped a foot away. You brought the man you were robbing, I whispered low enough that only he in the front row could hear, into your office. You handed him a uniform, a mop, and a master key. I tapped the uniform on my chest. You didn't just invite me to the crime scene, Darren. You hired me to clean it up. I am standing in front of my son. He is shaking. His face has gone the color of ash. He's looking at me, but he isn't seeing his father. He's seeing the end. I let the silence stretch. I let every person in that room, every vice president, every board member absorb the full weight of his betrayal. I let him stand there and suffocate in the truth. Lacey at the back had sunk into her chair. Her face was buried in her hands. Darren tried to speak. It was a mistake. We can fix this. Dad, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut straight through his stammering. You lost the right to call me that. You lost it when you called me an extra mouth to feed. You lost it when you put me in this uniform. And you damn sure lost it when you tried to steal $50 million from your mother's legacy. I turned away from him. I had no desire to look at him any longer. I looked at the one other man in the room I trusted, Graham. Graham Ellery snapped to attention. Yes, sir. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I gave the order as calmly as if I were asking for a glass of water. Fire him. Darren flinched. What? No, you can't, Graham. He's senile. He's a janitor. You can't take orders from him. Graham Ellery buttoned his suit jacket. He walked with stiff deliberation from the head of the table until he was standing directly in front of Darren. He looked down at my son. Darren Fairwood. Ellery said, his voice carrying the official cold register of a chief executive. As of this moment, 10:14 a.m., Friday, your employment with Vidian Dynamics is terminated effective immediately. No, Darren shrieked. You work for me, Graham. I'm the VP. He's just the janitor. He is the sole owner of this company, Darren Graham said, his voice thick with contempt. And you are a fraud. Your benefits are canceled. Your stock options are revoked. Your corporate accounts are frozen. A security team is waiting outside to escort you from the building. Darren's legs buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to hold himself upright. My stock options, my pension. I've worked here for 15 years. You've been stealing for 2, I said from the head of the table. You get nothing. You deserve nothing. You can't do this to me, he cried, his voice cracking into a desperate, ragged whine. This is my life. I built this. You're just a bitter old man in a costume. You're trying to ruin me. Ruin you, I said, rising from the chair. No, son, ruin is what you did to your mother's memory. Ruin is what you planned for this company. What I am doing this is accountability. This is a corporate matter, Darren screamed, turning to appeal to the board. It's a misunderstanding. It's a family dispute. You can't bring in outsiders. You're right, I said. This isn't just a corporate matter. Attempting to defraud a company of $50 million, falsifying SEC, mandated valuation reports using wire transfers to funnel money into an illegal offshore shell company. I looked toward the heavy mahogany doors. That's not a family dispute, Darren. That's a federal crime. As if on cue, the boardroom doors swung open. This time, it was not a janitor. 2 men and 1 woman in dark blue suits badges clipped to their belts. Earpieces in place stepped inside. The lead agent, a tall, no-nonsense woman, held up her credentials. Darren Fairwood, Lacey Fairwood. Darren stopped breathing. His entire body went rigid. The agent didn't wait for a response. We are the FBI. You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and violations of the Securities Exchange Act. The sound Lacey made was not human. It was a high-pitched wail of pure terror. No! No! Darren, do something! Tell them it's a mistake. The agents were efficient. They moved past the stunned board members. 2 of them walked directly to Darren. Sir, please put your hands behind your back. This is ridiculous, Darren stammered, but his arms went behind him as though they had no will of their own. I heard the sharp, definitive click of the handcuffs. The sound rang out across the silent room. The third agent had moved to the back wall where Lacey was trying to press herself into the expensive wallpaper. Ma'am, please stand up. I didn't do anything, she shrieked, batting the agent's hand away. It was him. It was all him. I didn't know anything about the money he made me. He's a liar. Darren, tell them. Darren didn't even glance at her. He was staring only at me. His face was a collapsed ruin. The agent gripped Lacey's wrist, pulled her upright, and cuffed her. Her ivory blazer and skirt were now creased and disheveled. Her perfect hair had come undone. And then she simply folded. Her eyes rolled back and she fainted, crumpling onto the thick carpet. We have a fainter, the agent said, unbothered. Get the paramedics up here. But the other two agents didn't slow down. They took Darren by the arms. "Let's go, sir." They began walking him out. They walked him past the board of directors, the men and women who not 10 minutes ago had sat at his command. They looked away, unable to hold his gaze. They walked him past Graham Ellery, who gave a single slow shake of his head in disgust. And then they walked him past me. He stopped. The agents pulled at him, but his feet found the floor. He turned his head. His eyes were red. His pride was gone. His arrogance had shattered. All that remained was the hollow shell of my son. He was cuffed. He was beaten. He was in federal custody. And he was looking at me standing there in my janitor's uniform, his father, the man who owned everything. His lips trembled. He asked the only question he had left. "Father," he whispered, his voice broken. "Why?" The agents pulled him again. "Let's go." They hauled him out of the boardroom, out of his own life, leaving me alone in the silence of my company, with my wife's name on the wall. I had my answer ready. I had been shaping it for days. I would give it to him when he was truly ready to hear it. The boardroom descended into chaos. Lacey, my daughter-in-law, was now hysterical, screaming at the FBI agents as they helped her to her feet. The board members were all talking over one another, their faces cycling through shock and disgust. Graham Ellery was already on the phone, his legal team no doubt beginning the long work of damage control. The agents led Darren out of the room. He didn't look back. I stood there a moment alone at the head of the table. The janitor who owned the company. I turned to Graham, who had ended his call. "Graham!" I said, my voice heavy. He came to me quickly. "Sir, are you all right? What do you need?" "I am so sorry. I need 5 minutes alone with him," I said, tilting my head toward the hallway where Darren had been taken, "before they move him downtown." Graham looked surprised, but he nodded without hesitation. "Of course. They're holding him in the security office on the ground floor. I'll arrange it." I rode the freight elevator down. The metal box felt different this time. When I had stepped into it this morning, I was a prop, a joke. Now I was the executioner. The security office was a small, windowless room off the lobby. Darren was seated on a hard plastic bench. His expensive suit was creased. His tie was gone. The handcuffs had been removed, though a uniformed officer stood watch at the door. He didn't look up when I entered. He just stared at the gray linoleum floor. I stood in front of him. I was still wearing the janitor's uniform. I wanted him to see it. I wanted it to be the thing he remembered. The silence ran long. Finally, he spoke a whisper. "Why?" It was the same question he had asked in the boardroom. Not how did you find out? Not what happens to me now? But why? As though I were the one who had done the betraying. "Why?" I repeated. I pulled up a plastic chair and sat down across from him. "You want to know why I did this? Why I exposed you? Why I didn't simply let it go? Why I didn't just hand you the money you wanted?" He still wouldn't look at me. "I did it," I said, keeping my voice low. "Because of your mother." He flinched. That was the first genuine reaction I had gotten from him. He squeezed his eyes shut. "I did it because of Rosalind. Because that woman worked 20 hours a day right alongside me in our cold garage. She was soldering circuit boards with you in her lap. She was the one who went without new shoes for 2 years, so we could cover the patent application for our first algorithm." I leaned in closer. "She believed in this company. But more than that, Darren, she believed in you. She thought you were the sun and the moon. She thought you were the kindest, smartest, most wonderful boy in the world. She died believing that. She died proud of you." I paused, letting the weight of his mother's memory settle over that small, sterile room. "When she passed," I continued, "I made her 2 promises. I promised I would protect the company we had built together. And I promised I would protect you. For 40 years I kept both. I shielded you from the world. I shielded you from the pressures that come with wealth. I shielded you from the kind of greed that hollows good men out, turns them into men like you. I told him the truth I had never spoken aloud to anyone but Clifford. We never lied to you, Darren. We just lived simply. We built GC Holdings from nothing. We were worth $100 million before you ever finished high school. But your mother was frightened. She was frightened that money would poison you, that it would make you weak, that you would never understand what it meant to earn something for yourself. So we made a pact. I said we would stay in our small house. I would drive my old truck. We would give you a normal life. We wanted you to be better than us. We wanted you to be strong and good on your own terms. We wanted you to grow up knowing the worth of hard work, of integrity, of family. I looked at his cuffed hands. I see now, I said, my voice carrying a sadness that ran deeper than anger, that we made a terrible mistake. Our plan failed. He finally looked up. His eyes were red and hollow. What mistake? We didn't teach you the value of money, Darren. We only taught you how to live without it. We were so consumed with guarding you from wealth that we never showed you how to handle it or how to handle not having it. I got to my feet and began to pace the small room. When you looked at me, I said, gesturing to the uniform on my back, you didn't see a father who had chosen a simple life. You saw a failure. You saw an old man who hadn't reached what you had. You, the powerful vice president in the corner office. Me, the old fool scraping by on a meager pension. Our humility, my humility, didn't make you grateful. It made you arrogant. It made you ashamed of me. And that shame, that contempt, that's what let you do this. You justified stealing from me because you believed you were superior. You told yourself you deserved it. You told yourself I was just a poor old man, a senile fool, an extra mouth to feed. I stopped pacing and stood over him. You didn't just try to steal from some faceless corporation, Darren. You tried to steal from me. You looked your own father in the eye, a man you believed to be broke and retired, and all you felt was contempt. You set me to work cleaning your bathrooms, and you did it all to cover up a crime built on spitting on your mother's legacy. I shook my head. So why did I do this? I did it because Rosalind is gone, and I am the only one left to protect what we built. I am the only one left to insist on integrity. I did this because my honor and your mother's honor is not for sale. I looked at him, my son, a man I no longer recognized, hollowed out by his own greed. The officer at the door stood motionless. This was not a father-son conversation. This was a post-mortem. Darren finally raised his head. The anger was drained out of him. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was a vast empty space. My job, he whispered the words barely reaching me. My stock options, my reputation. It's all gone. He dragged his cuffed hands across his face. Lacey, God, Lacey, she won't. He couldn't finish the sentence. He already knew his partner in this would turn on him the same way he had turned on me. Everything, he choked out. Everything we built, it's gone. He let out a laugh, a single sharp, hysterical bark. And the house, of course, they'll take the house. That's the first thing to go. Lacey, she just picked out new furniture. She loved that house more than anything. He looked at me, something almost like pleading entering his eyes for the first time. They're going to take the house, aren't they? It's over. I just looked at him. I listened as he tallied up his losses, his career, his reputation, his wife, his house. Not once did he say, I've lost my father. Not once did he say, I've lost my honor. Even at rock bottom, he was grieving only the things. He was right about one thing, though. It was over. But he still didn't grasp the full truth. The house, I said, my voice flat. You mean the 5-bedroom colonial on Maple Drive? The one with the blue stone patio and the big oak tree out front? Yes, he said, thrown by my tone. Our house. They'll seize it. It's our only real asset. I almost smiled. It was a bitter, sad impulse. No, Darren, I said. They won't seize the house. A small, desperate flicker of hope crossed his face. They won't? Why not? Is it protected? Yes, I said. It's protected. They can't seize the house, Darren, because you never owned it. He blinked. What are you talking about? I have a mortgage. I've been paying that mortgage for 10 years. The door to the security office opened. Darren flinched, but it wasn't the FBI. It was Clifford Vega, my lawyer, my asset manager, my oldest friend. He was carrying a slim black leather folder. Clifford, I said, without taking my eyes off Darren. Thank you for coming. Lionel, he said with a nod. He then turned his cool professional gaze on my son. Mr. Fairwood. Darren looked at Clifford, a man he'd encountered a handful of times at dull charity functions. A man he had always dismissed as one of my dad's old friends. Clifford, I said, my son and I were just discussing his real estate holdings. He seems to be under the impression that he owns his home. Darren stood up. I do own it. I have the mortgage statements. I have the bank records. Who exactly are you? Clifford simply opened the black folder. He drew out a single sheet of paper and set it on the bench in front of Darren. You have statements, Mr. Fairwood. Clifford said, his voice measured and precise. For what you believed was a mortgage. What you actually have is a lease agreement. Darren stared at the page. I knew exactly what he was reading, the property at 14 Briarcliff Court. That property, Clifford continued as if reciting from a legal notice, is not owned by you or your wife. It is and has been since its construction the property of a corporation, specifically GC Holdings subsidiary 7 LLC. I watched my son's face as the words registered. I watched the color leave it a second time. GC Holdings, he whispered. You. It's you again. It's always been me, son, I said. But the payments. I've been paying over $3,000 a month for 10 years. Clifford Vega slid a second sheet across the bench. It was a copy of the true lease agreement. Your contractually obligated rent for that property, Mr. Fairwood, was $500 a month, a symbolic figure set by your father. $500. Darren was completely lost. No, I pay $3,000. I watch it leave my account every month. I see it. Yes, you do, Clifford said. You paid $3,000 a month as agreed into a holding account. $500 of that went to GC Holdings to cover the lease and property taxes. The remaining $2,500 your father had me place into a separate interest-bearing trust fund. I spoke up. It was meant to be a surprise, Darren, for your 50th birthday, a nest egg, proof that you could accumulate savings. I was just looking out for you. I had wanted him to feel as though he were building equity. I had wanted him to know the pride of paying a mortgage, of holding a home without the real risk hanging over him. I didn't want him burdened. I wanted him safe. Like every choice I had ever made on his behalf, it had been a kind of lie, a lie that came from love and the need to protect. But a lie nonetheless, and one that had quietly rotted him from the inside out. Darren looked at the paper. He looked at Clifford. He looked at me, the janitor, and finally he understood. His entire life, his Wharton MBA, his fast-track rise to vice president, his corner office, his comfortable suburban home, his sense of himself, all of it. It was a stage, a play, a set that I had constructed around him. He wasn't a vice president. He was an actor. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a trust fund baby who had never once been handed the truth. He hadn't lost his job. He hadn't lost his house. Those things had never been his to lose. He dropped his face into his hands. This wasn't the sharp, defiant fury from the boardroom. It wasn't the trembling, frightened whimpering either. It was a deep, guttural sob, the kind wrung out of a man who has just grasped at 40 years old that he is nothing. He had never accomplished a thing, never built a thing, never truly owned a thing. He had spent his whole life looking down at a poor old janitor, only to discover that the janitor had been carrying him the entire time. He was completely, utterly broke. Darren was still sobbing, shoulders heaving, a wholly broken man, when the security office door flew open. It wasn't the FBI. It was Lacey. She had composed herself enough to be escorted in. Her hands were cuffed in front of her. Her ivory blazer and skirt were smudged with dirt, and her carefully pinned hair was spilling loose from its bun. A female agent had hold of her arm, but her eyes were wild. She had heard Darren's sobs through the door. "Darren!" she shrieked. "What did you tell them? What did you say?" She spotted me in my janitor's uniform and then saw Clifford Vega standing in his expensive suit, gripping the folder that had just dismantled her life. Her entire strategy shifted in a heartbeat. The fury drained away. The defiance evaporated. She lurched forward as far as the agent would allow. "Lionel," she cried out. Her voice turned suddenly wet with tears. Manufactured tears. The kind I had watched her deploy on Darren for years. "Father, please, you have to hear me out." She sank to her knees. It was a spectacular piece of theater. "Please," she sobbed. I didn't know about any of it. The company sale, the offshore accounts. That was all him. It was Darren. She lifted a cuffed hand toward her husband. He told me it was a legitimate investment. He said his company wanted to acquire it. He used me. He used my mother's name. He said it was just a formality, a way to sidestep a conflict of interest. "I'm a victim, Lionel. I'm a victim the same as you." Darren's head jerked up. The sobbing cut off. "What are you talking about, Lacey? You pushed me to do this. You cried for 3 nights when I said the board might turn it down." "He's lying." Lacey screamed at me, cutting Darren out entirely. "He's desperate. He's trying to pull me down with him. Father, please." "You're a good man. You're a father. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll testify against him. I'll lay out everything he did." Just help me. I can't go to prison. I can't." She was offering to sell out my son, her own husband, to spare herself. It was the most pathetic, predictable, and disgusting thing I had ever seen. I simply looked at her. Not a word left my lips. I let her sob and beg on the linoleum floor. "Please," she begged, edging forward an inch on her knees. I was just trying to be a good wife. I was only supporting my husband. Isn't that what a wife is supposed to do? I held the silence in the room like a weight. Then I reached into the breast pocket of my blue uniform. I pulled out my old bar phone, the one Darren assumed was the only one I owned. I pressed a button. It wasn't a satellite phone, just a plain recorder. I had been capturing audio for 3 days. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room. It was from the day before out in the hallway, the moment she had thrown her tea and blueberry muffin on the floor at my feet. Her voice was not sobbing then. It was cold, crisp, and loaded with contempt. "Clean that up," her recorded voice rang out in the small room. "And this time, try to get all of it. I saw you missed a spot yesterday. We do have standards on the executive floor." Lacey went rigid. The fake tears seemed to evaporate off her face on the spot. I pressed another button. "Oh my goodness," her voice trilled, the recording from her very first day when she spilled the cappuccino on my trousers. "You'll get that, won't you, Lionel? It's what you're here for, right?" I stopped the recording. "You weren't supporting your husband, Lacey," I said, keeping my voice low. "You weren't being a good wife. You were savoring it. You loved the idea that I was beneath you. You took pleasure in humiliating a 71-year-old man you believed was poor and powerless. You enjoyed having someone to order around someone to clean up your mess." I looked at her kneeling on the floor. "The problem is, you were just too stupid to realize you were the mess." "And the money," I went on. "You were no passive victim. I looked at those financials, Lacey. I saw the $40,000 charge at the jeweler last month. I saw the leasing agreement for the Mercedes. I saw the $5,000 spa weekend." I leaned in closer. "Your husband is weak, but you, Lacey, you are greedy, and your greed drove him to desperation. You were drowning him in debt. This wasn't his scheme. This was your escape route. You just needed him to be the one to pull the trigger." Lacey's face, which had been arranged into a mask of false sorrow, twisted now into something ugly and raw. She finally understood. The performance was finished. There was nobody left here to fool. She rose slowly to her feet, handcuffs rattling. She looked at me, then at Darren. "You," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. She was speaking to her husband. "You idiot. You told me he was nothing. You told me he was a broke, senile old man." Darren just stared at her, his face blank and numb. "This is your fault!" She screamed, lunging toward him. The female agent seized her and hauled her back. "You ruined everything. You were too stupid to even know who your own father was. You are useless. You were always useless. I never loved you. I only married you because I thought you had a future. But this," she gestured at me at my uniform. "Your father is a janitor, and you're just the son of a janitor." She was so consumed by her rage that she still could not see the truth. "You're wrong, Lacey," I said quietly. "I'm not a janitor. I'm just a man who put on a uniform to see what his children were truly made of." I looked at Darren still slumped on the bench. Then I turned back to her. "And you're not the son of a janitor. You're just nothing. 6 months passed. 6 months of legal battles, of depositions, of watching my family's name dragged through the mud. That was the price of the truth. I did not sit in that courtroom every single day. I couldn't. I let Clifford Vega and the federal prosecutors work through the ugly particulars. The evidence pulled from Darren's computer, the terabytes of data off the server, was beyond refuting. The wire transfers, the falsified valuations, the emails between him and Lacey. It was an open and shut case, but I was there for the sentencing. I took my seat in the back row of the federal courthouse in a plain dark suit. Not a CEO, not a janitor, just a father watching the end of his son's life as he had known it. Darren rose when the judge called his name. He had shed weight. His expensive suit hung off him like a shroud. The easy arrogance he had always worn was gone, replaced by a dull, hollow shell of a man. Lacey sat beside him, weeping without sound. Her defense that she had been a victim of her husband's manipulation collapsed the moment the prosecutor played the hallway recording of her ordering me to clean up her trash. Their lawyers appealed for leniency. They called it a lapse in judgment. They framed it as a family matter that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. The judge, a formidable woman named Vivian Okafor, peered at them over the top of her glasses. Her voice was glacial. "This was not poor judgment," she said, her words carrying through the packed courtroom. "This was a calculated, cold-blooded conspiracy, built on the ugliest possible foundation: greed and contempt for one's own family. You," she said, fixing her gaze directly on Darren, "did not merely attempt to defraud a company. You did it by leveraging the humiliation of your own father." She sentenced Darren to 10 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and violating his fiduciary duty. She sentenced Lacey to 7 years for her role in the conspiracy. I watched them. I watched the Sal Marshals instruct them to stand. I heard the click of the handcuffs. Lacey collapsed sobbing, but Darren simply stood there hollow. As they let him out, he turned his head and his eyes found mine across the back of the courtroom. I couldn't quite name what I saw in his face. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't regret. It was just emptiness. I gave him one slow, quiet nod, and then he was gone. With the trial behind me, it was time to rebuild my company. Graham Ellery had done a commendable job containing the damage, but the workforce at Vidian Dynamics was rattled. GC Holdings was no longer some faceless offshore entity. The story of the billionaire janitor had gotten out. It was splashed across every financial news outlet. Graham scheduled an all-hands meeting for the whole company. The memo said simply, "A formal address from the chairman of GC Holdings." At 10 a.m. the following Monday, I arrived at Nexara Tower. This time, I did not go to the service entrance. I did not park in Lot G. My car, a simple but elegant black sedan, pulled right up to the front doors. This time, I was not wearing a blue uniform. I wore a dark gray suit, custom-made and perfectly fitted. I had on the gold watch Rosalind gave me for our 25th anniversary. I crossed the main lobby. The security guards, the same ones who had watched me push my cart, snapped to attention. The employees, the very same ones who had whispered about the VP's old man, now stared, stepping aside as if the sea were parting. I didn't smile. I just walked. I took the main glass elevator up to the 18th floor. The boardroom was packed. Graham had set up a live feed to the rest of the building. Every employee from every floor was crammed in, lining the walls. The same secretaries who had snickered at me, the same VPs Darren had worked so hard to impress. Graham Ellery stood at the podium. When he caught sight of me, he stopped mid-sentence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "please welcome the founder, chairman, and sole owner of GC Holdings, Mr. Lionel Fairwood." I walked to the front of the room. I stood at the podium and looked out over that sea of faces. They were afraid. They were curious. They were looking at me as though I were something out of a legend. "Good morning," I said. My voice was steady. "My name is Lionel Fairwood, and for many of you on this floor, the last time you laid eyes on me, I was emptying your trash cans." A wave of uneasy shock moved through the room. "I know you have questions," I went on. "Why would a man who owns this company pretend to be a janitor? Was it a test? Some kind of cruel game?" I shook my head. "No, it was not a test. It was a tragedy. My wife Rosalind and I founded GC Holdings more than 40 years ago. We started it in a garage. We built it on one simple principle: integrity above all. That motto is carved into the foundation stone of this very building. We believed that hard work was its own reward. We believed that humility was a strength, not a weakness. We raised our son to believe those same things. Or so we thought. I came here as a janitor because my son Darren Fairwood told me he didn't want to feed an extra mouth. He offered me that job, called it charity. In reality," I said, my voice going harder, "he hired me to humiliate me. He hired me to control me. He hired me to keep me busy scrubbing his floors while he worked to steal $50 million from his mother's legacy." I paused. "I mopped these floors. I cleaned your break rooms. I polished the plaque bearing my wife's name. And while I worked, I listened. I watched VPs treat their assistants like personal servants. I watched managers take 3-hour lunches while their teams drowned in work. And I saw the cleaning crew, the facilities staff, the mailroom clerks, the invisible people being treated as though they were nothing, the same way I was treated. My son's behavior was not an isolated incident. It was the symptom of a sickness inside this company's culture, a sickness that ends today. The Innovate deal, as you all know, was a fraud. That company has since filed for bankruptcy. It is worthless. So, GC Holdings, we bought it. We acquired it this morning for exactly $1. I could see the confusion spreading across their faces. The $50 million that Darren Fairwood attempted to steal, I announced I am moving that exact amount out of this quarter's profits. It will serve as the seed money for a new fund. It will be called the Innovate Integrity Fund, and its sole purpose will be to fully fund the pension and healthcare benefits of every single support staff employee in this building. The mailroom, the security guards, the cafeteria, workers, the janitors. Their retirement will be guaranteed forever. The VPs stood there stunned. The secretaries in the back, I watched one of them begin to cry. My son believed I was just an extra mouth to feed, I finished. He was wrong. I am the man who feeds everyone. This company was built on integrity. It will be run on integrity. From this day forward, we are all done with trash. Thank you. A year passed. Life settled into a new strange rhythm. I was 72 years old and back at the helm of my own company. The janitor's uniform was long gone, traded for the quiet authority of a well-tailored suit. Vidian Dynamics was thriving. The sickness I had uncovered on the 18th floor was being methodically cut out. Integrity, it turned out, was very good for business. I had Graham Ellery and Clifford Vega handle the sale of the house on 14 Briarcliff Court, that sprawling 5-bedroom monument to my son's ambition. I couldn't bring myself to set foot in it again. It sold in less than a day. I took every cent of the equity, the wealth Darren had thought he was building, and used it to establish the Rosalind Fairwood Kitchen, a place downtown where the hungry, the forgotten, the extra mouths could come for a hot meal, no questions asked. I went there myself, not as a CEO, but as a volunteer. I served soup, I washed dishes. It felt right. Lacey, I heard, had filed for divorce from Darren before the trial even wrapped up. She'd testified against him, painting herself as an unsuspecting victim. It hadn't worked. She was serving her 7 years at a low-security facility. And Darren, he was in a federal penitentiary 2 states away. I had not spoken to him since the sentencing. I had not visited. The letters he sent I handed to Clifford to read. They were what you'd expect, angry, accusatory, full of appeals. But then one Tuesday, a different kind of letter arrived. It was written on cheap-lined prison paper. The handwriting was uncertain, smaller than I remembered. It wasn't from Darren Fairwood, VP. It was from my son. Dear Dad, it began. I sat in my home office, the same small office in the same modest house, and I read it. It wasn't a request for money. It wasn't a plea from my lawyers. It wasn't an excuse. It was simply an apology. I have been here for 1 year, he wrote. I don't see the sun much. I work in the prison laundry. I fold sheets all day, and all day I think. I think about that boardroom. I think about your face. I think about the janitor's uniform. I have spent every day of the last 12 months trying to understand not just how I could have been so foolish, but how I could have been so cruel. I remember Mom. I remember her telling me to always be kind, that kindness was the only thing that truly mattered. I used to believe that. I don't know when I stopped. I've lost everything. I know that. I lost my job, my house, my wife, my freedom. I deserve to lose all of it. I know that now. I will serve my time. But there is one thing, Dad, one thing I cannot understand. One question that keeps me awake night after night. Why did you do it that way? You're the owner. You are GC Holdings. You knew about the fraud. You could have called Graham Ellery from your house. You could have had me fired. You could have had me arrested right at my desk. You held every card. You could have done anything. So why Dad? Why did you become a janitor? Why did you put on that uniform? Why did you let me and Lacey treat you that way? Why did you let it happen? I set the letter down on my desk. I looked at the photograph of Rosalind beside my computer. Her smile was as bright as ever. I had asked myself that very same question. Why hadn't I simply cut out the cancer? Why had I put myself through that humiliation? I'd told myself it was to gather evidence. I'd told myself it was to see the crime with my own eyes. But that wasn't it. Not really. The truth came to me as I sat there staring at my son's desperate handwriting. I had wanted to give him one last chance. On some foolish fatherly level, I had hoped that even if he believed I was a poor, powerless old man, he would still extend to me some basic human kindness. I had hoped that the son Rosalind and I had raised was still in there, buried somewhere beneath the arrogance and the greed. I had set up a test not for the company, not for the board. It was a final exam for my son's soul. I reached for a pen and a sheet of my own plain stationery. Darren, I wrote you ask why I became a janitor. You ask why I allowed you to treat me that way. I did it because I needed to know the truth, not about the money. I already knew about the money. I needed to know the truth about you. I needed to know whether the man I raised was still inside there somewhere. I needed to see what you would do when you held all the power and I had none. I needed to know if you would show one moment of kindness to a helpless old man who happened to be your own father, whether you would bring him a cup of coffee, whether you would defend him even once from your wife's cruelty, whether you would see him as a human being rather than a prop or a burden. I needed to know if the son my wife loved was still alive. I held the pen over the paper. The truth was heavy. It was cold. But it had to be written. I walked in as a janitor hoping to find my son. What I found instead was a stranger who looked straight through me. You didn't fail because you were greedy, Darren. You failed because you were unkind. You didn't fail because you committed fraud. You failed because you had no integrity. That is the final exam of a man's character, not how he treats his equals or his superiors, but how he treats the man who mops the floor. And you failed. I didn't visit him for 2 years. The letters from the federal penitentiary stopped coming. I suppose the prison counselors told him to quit writing, or maybe he simply had nothing left to say. I ran the company. I took my place at the head of the table in the Rosalind Fairwood Memorial Conference Room. I oversaw the expansion of the Integrity Fund for the support staff. I made certain the janitors, the security guards, the men and women who truly keep that building running had health care and pensions that my VPs would envy. And I spent my weekends serving soup at Rosalind's kitchen. Then last week I woke up knowing it was time. I took the company jet 2 states over. The federal prison was a gray concrete box set on a flat, empty plane. The air carried the smell of dust and disinfectant. I moved through the security checks. They took my belt. They took my shoes. They took my watch, the one Rosalind gave me. They ran a wand over my plain clothes. To those guards, I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't a janitor. I was just a visitor. I sat in the visitation room, a loud, hollow space filled with plastic chairs bolted to the floor, and the sound of families working hard to seem normal. A buzzer sounded. A heavy steel door swung open. The guard brought him in. I didn't recognize him at first. This was not my son. This was not the arrogant vice president who had screamed at me in that boardroom. This was not the man in handcuffs I had last seen in the holding cell. This man was old. He was 42 years old, but he looked 60. His hair had nearly vanished, just a gray-black fuzz across his scalp. He was thin, unsettlingly thin. The blue prison-issue jumpsuit hung off his frame like it was draped on a wire hanger. His eyes were the worst part. The fire was gone. The arrogance was gone. They were simply dull. He sat down across from me at the small plastic table. The guard stood 10 feet away. "Hello, Darren," I said. His voice came out as a dry rasp. "Dad, you came." I came. We sat in silence for a long stretch. The clock on the wall buzzed. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared down at his own hands flat on the table. They were rough, calloused. The hands of a man who had really worked for the first time in his life. "I read your letter," I said at last. "The one you sent a year ago." He nodded slowly. "I meant it," he whispered. "Every word. I know what I did. I failed. I know that." "Yes," I said. "You did." He finally looked up. His eyes were red. "I get it now. I understand why you did it. The test, the janitor's uniform. You had to see if I was still good. You had to know my character. And I failed. I was ashamed of you, Dad. I was ashamed because I thought you were poor. I just looked at him. A test. That's what he believed it was." I shook my head slowly. I hadn't come here to argue. I hadn't come to forgive him. I had come to close the book. "Darren," I said, keeping my voice low, "I need you to listen to me. That Sunday, the dinner at your house, the day you sat at that table, the table I bought you and told me you didn't want to feed an extra mouth." He flinched and dropped his eyes back to his hands. "I remember. I remember it too," I said. "Every word. Do you know where I had been that morning, Darren, before I came to your house for dinner?" He shook his head, not daring to look up. "I was at my desk in my home office. I was with Clifford Vega. We were finalizing paperwork." "What paperwork?" he whispered. "My retirement paperwork," I said. I was 71. I was tired. I was ready to be finished. I had spent that entire morning going over the final draft of a legal transfer, a very, very large one. I was scheduled to sign it the following Friday. Darren looked up, his dull eyes clouded with confusion. "Sign what? What transfer?" I leaned forward as far as the table would allow. "I was signing over the entire GC Holdings portfolio," I said. Vidian Dynamics, the real estate division, the tech startups, the offshore accounts, the foundations, everything Darren, the entire empire. He just stared at me. He wasn't processing it. His mind dulled by 2 years, and that place couldn't take in the scale of what I was saying. I was giving it all to you, son, I said, my voice flat. All of it. Billions. Your mother's legacy. It was meant to become your legacy. My plan had been to retire, to actually become the old man I'd been pretending to be. I was going to travel. I was going to volunteer full-time at Rosalind's kitchen, and I was going to hand you the company you thought you were already conquering. I watched his face. I watched the confusion turn slowly and horribly into understanding. I watched the color drain out of him. He didn't just go pale, he went the shade of the concrete walls surrounding us. He understood. He opened his mouth, but only a dry rattling sound came out. He understood that his greed, his arrogance, his impatience. He had tried to steal $50 million from the very man who was at that exact moment in the process of giving him $50 billion. He had been so desperate to prove he was someone that he couldn't see he was already the king. He had been so ashamed of his poor father that he couldn't see his father was the source of everything he had. He didn't just sob, he crumpled. He folded in on himself with a deep, agonizing wail that came from somewhere so broken I almost felt pity for him. He put his head down on that plastic table and wept. He wept for the empire he had forfeited. He wept for the future he had destroyed. He had thrown it all away. Not for $50 million. He had thrown it all away because he was embarrassed, because he didn't want to feed an extra mouth. I stood up. The guard looked over, and I gave a nod. My time was done. I looked down at the shell of my son, sobbing over the ghost of a life he had burned to the ground. I had lost him. I had lost Darren the day Rosalind died, and I had failed to see the man he was becoming. I lost him the day he looked at my old truck with shame. I lost him the day he saw me as a burden instead of a father. But I had saved my wife's legacy. I had saved my company. I walked out of that visitation room. I left my son with the truth, a prison far more permanent than the one built from concrete and steel. Darren will be eligible for parole in 8 years. He will be 50 years old. I walked out of that prison and I didn't look back, not out of coldness, out of finality. The chapter was closed. This road cost me years. It cost me the easy version of old age I had pictured traveling, resting, letting someone I trusted carry the weight. I believe God allowed me to walk through every humiliation for a reason. Not to punish me, but to protect what Rosalind and I had built together. The truth always surfaces. It may take time, but it surfaces. And when it does, you had better have done the quiet work to be ready for it. If you're somewhere in the middle of your own long story, if you're a part of this community of adults, 50 plus, who have lived enough to know that the deepest wounds often come from family, then this family revenge story is for you. You are not alone in what you've carried. Here is what I want to leave with you. First, never measure a person's character by how they treat the powerful. Watch how they treat the invisible. That is where the truth lives. Second, if someone underestimates you, let them. Silence and patience are the sharpest tools you own. Third, what you build in integrity cannot be stolen, only abandoned by those too foolish to recognize its worth. Fourth, before you write anyone off, give them the chance to show you who they really are, and accept what they show you. If this story moved you, I'd be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below. Tell me which moment stayed with you. And if you haven't already subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories, there are more stories waiting for you here. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until the next one, take care of yourself.